My greedy daughter-in-law scheduled a lunch with the banker. She wanted me to withdraw my late husband's money. But dessert turned bitter when I transferred everything to the niece who had cared for me. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The cream-colored invitation card sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I finally picked it up again. Jennifer, let's have lunch this Thursday. Just us girls. I've missed our talks. It was signed with Ursula's flowing script, a heart dotting the I in her name. My daughter-in-law had never invited me to lunch before, not once in the 8 years she'd been. Married to my Anthony, not even after Robert, my husband of 40 years, passed away 6 months ago. During those dark days, it was my niece Grace who brought me meals, checked my medication, and sat with me through endless sleepless nights. But now, suddenly, Ursula wanted girl time. I should have known better. The Magnolia Room was Ursula's choice, the most expensive restaurant in town, with crystal chandeliers and waiters who acted like they were doing you a favor by taking your order. She waved enthusiastically as I entered, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured toward the seat across from her. "Jennifer, you look wonderful," she gushed, her voice too loud, her smile too wide. "I was beginning to worry you wouldn't come." "Traffic," I said simply, though I'd actually spent 20 minutes sitting in my car in the parking lot, building up the courage to face her. Since Robert's death, social situations exhausted me in ways they never had before. Ursula talked endlessly. Through the appetizers, about her tennis club, Anthony's promotion, their recent vacation to the Bahamas. Not once did she ask how I was holding up without Robert. "Oh, I almost forgot to mention," she said as our entrees arrived. "We ran into Howard Perkins at the country club last weekend." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "Robert's banker? Such a coincidence." Ursula's laugh sounded rehearsed. "He asked about you, of course. Said he'd been trying to reach you." That was a lie. Howard had never called me. I would have remembered. "Actually," Ursula continued, lowering her voice, "he mentioned Robert's life insurance policy. Apparently, there are some documents that need your signature." A cold feeling spread through my chest. So that's what this lunch was about. "What kind of documents?" I asked, setting down my fork. Ursula's smile remained fixed, but her eyes sharpened. "Nothing complicated, just releasing the funds. Howard thought it might be easier if I helped you with the paperwork." She reached for her purse. "I actually brought them with me. What a coincidence that Howard's joining us for dessert." As if on cue, Howard appeared at our table, briefcase in hand, smile as artificial as the flower arrangement between us. "Jennifer, wonderful to see you," he said, sliding into the chair beside Ursula. "I've been meaning to call." "No, you haven't," I thought. The waiter arrived with dessert, creme brulee I hadn't ordered, as Howard pulled papers from his briefcase, explaining something about family access and co-management of funds. I felt Robert's absence like a physical ache. He would have seen through this immediately. The policy was substantial, $750,000. Robert had been meticulous about our financial security. Now I understood why Anthony and Ursula had suddenly remembered I existed. "It's really just a formality," Ursula was saying, sliding a pen toward me. "Since Anthony is your only child, this makes everything simpler." I stared at the pen, then at the eager faces watching me. In that moment, I saw them clearly, not as family, but as strangers waiting to claim what wasn't theirs. "I need to use the restroom," I said quietly. Once inside the bathroom stall, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and called the one person I knew I could trust. "Grace, it's Aunt Jennifer. I need your help." I transferred everything, every penny of Robert's life insurance, to Grace's account before returning to the table. The dessert sat untouched, melting slowly in its dish. "All set," said Howard, beaming at me. Just need your signature here and here. I looked at the papers, then at Ursula's expectant face and smiled for the first time that afternoon. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The funds have already been allocated. I've just transferred them to my niece Grace's account. The spoon in Ursula's hand clattered against the table. Her face went from confusion to disbelief to fury in the span of seconds. You did what? She hissed. The creme brulee never did go down. But for the first time since Robert died, I felt something like strength return to my bones. I barely had time to hang up my coat when the pounding started. 3 sharp raps that made the stained glass on my front door tremble. Mom, open the door. Right now! Anthony's voice, but not the Anthony I raised. This voice had an edge of desperation I'd never heard before. I took a deep breath before turning the lock. They burst in like storm clouds. My son's face darkened with rage, Ursula trailing. Behind, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her designer purse. What the hell were you thinking? Anthony demanded, not bothering with a greeting. Transferring Dad's money to Grace? Are you out of your mind? I steadied myself against the hallway table where Robert's picture still sat. Hello to you too. Anthony, don't play games, Mom. That money was supposed to stay in the family. Grace's family, I said quietly. Ursula stepped forward, her voice honeyed but her eyes cold. Jennifer, darling, we're not questioning your judgment, but surely you can see how this looks. Anthony is your son, your only child. That money should be staying with direct family. I walked past them into the living room, partly to sit down, before my knees gave out, partly to force them to follow me instead of dominating the entryway like invaders. The money is exactly where Robert wanted it to be, I said. Safe. Anthony paced in front of the fireplace, running his hands through, his hair the way he did as a teenager whenever he was caught in a lie. This is insane. Dad would never have wanted his money going to Grace instead of his own son. Your father would have wanted the money to support me, which is exactly what it's doing. Support you? Ursula scoffed. By giving it away? Grace hasn't been given anything. She's safeguarding it for me. Anthony stopped pacing. Safeguarding it? From who? From me? The hurt in his voice almost broke my resolve, until I remembered the cold calculation at that lunch table, the banker with paperwork ready, the trap they'd set. Anthony, when was the last time you came to check on me? Before today? He looked away. I've been busy. The promotion, the new accounts. 3 months, I said. You've been busy for 3 months while I packed up 40 years of marriage alone. Meanwhile, Grace has been here every day. So this is punishment? His voice cracked. For not visiting enough? This is protection, I corrected him. I saw the papers Howard brought, Anthony. They weren't just releasing funds to me. They were setting up a joint account, with your name on it. Ursula stepped forward. That was just to help you manage. I don't need managing, I interrupted. I managed our household finances for 40 years while Robert built his business. I'm not senile. I'm not incapable. Then why involve Grace at all? Anthony demanded. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The designer watch, the tailored suit, the new hardness around his mouth. When had he changed so much? Because I know the kind of debt you're in, I said quietly. The silence that fell was absolute. Anthony's face drained of color. What are you talking about? He whispered. Helen Bradshaw at the bank is an old friend. She called me 3 weeks ago, worried, after you tried to take out a third mortgage on your house. Ursula's composure cracked. That nosy old... How much is it, Anthony? I pressed. The debt? He looked away. $430,000? I felt the room sway slightly. For what? The market turned, he muttered. Some investments didn't pan out. And? He glanced at Ursula. And the lifestyle. I finished for him. The vacations. The country club. The boat I'd heard them bragging about. We can fix this, Ursula said quickly. If you just reverse the transfer, so you can fix it by draining Robert's insurance money? I shook my head. That's not happening. Anthony's face hardened. You need to understand something, Mom. If you don't help us with this, things are going to change. They already have, I replied. I mean between us. If you go through with this, siding with Grace over your own son. He took a deep breath. I don't think I can forgive that. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. My own child was threatening to disown me over money. Is that what you want, Anthony? To end our relationship over this? It's your choice, he said, coldly. Fix the transfer by tomorrow, or don't expect to hear from us again. I felt something inside me break, and then, surprisingly, reform stronger. Then I guess this is goodbye, I said. Ursula gasped. Anthony stared at me as if seeing a stranger. You don't mean that, he said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. I do. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The Anthony I raised would never have ambushed his grieving mother with a banker. He wouldn't have tried to trick me into signing away my security. And he certainly wouldn't have threatened to abandon me for refusing. Mom, your father protected me until his last breath, I continued. He wouldn't recognize the man standing in front of me now. Anthony's face contorted. This isn't over. He spat, turning toward the door. Ursula lingered a moment longer, her expression calculating. You'll regret this, Jennifer. When you're all alone, you'll wish you'd made a different choice. I watched them storm out, the door slamming hard, enough to rattle the windows. Only then did I let myself sink into Robert's old armchair, my body trembling with adrenaline and grief. I wasn't naive enough to think this was the end. But for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than emptiness. I had stood my ground. The phone rang, Grace checking on me. I took a deep breath before answering. I'm okay, I said, surprised to find it wasn't entirely a lie. But I think I've just lost my son. The silence in my house grew heavier as the days passed. My calendar, once filled with family dinners and visits with the grandchildren, now bore empty squares. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Anthony and Ursula. 2 weeks of no phone calls, no visits, no photos of the grandkids. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, watching the mailman deliver letters I already knew wouldn't include anything from my son. The silence was its own kind of punishment, exactly as they had intended. My phone buzzed. Grace, checking in as she did twice daily now. How are you holding up, Aunt Jen? Her voice was warm, concerned. I'm fine, I lied, staring at the family photos still displayed on my refrigerator. I'm coming over tonight, she said, not asking. I'll bring dinner. I was lucky to have Grace. At 38, she had her own busy life as a physical therapist, yet she never made me feel like a burden, unlike Anthony, who had treated each visit after Robert's death like an obligation to be checked off a list. After hanging up, I wandered into the study, Robert's sanctuary that I'd barely entered since his passing. Dust had settled on his leather, chair, his desk, the bookshelves lining the walls. I ran my finger along the shelf, leaving a clean line in the gray film. Something caught my eye, a photo album I didn't recognize, wedged between financial reference books. I pulled it out, surprised by its weight. The cover was plain blue leather with no markings. I settled into Robert's chair and opened it. The first photo made my breath catch. Anthony as a toddler, round-faced and laughing, held in Robert's arms. Page after page of moments. Anthony's first bike ride, high school graduation, wedding day. But there was something odd about the later photos. In images with Ursula, Robert's smile never quite reached his eyes. And there were notes, small post-its in Robert's neat handwriting attached to certain images. Anthony asked for $20K for business investment. No details provided. gave 5K instead. Dated 3 years ago. Ursula pushed for access to retirement accounts at Thanksgiving dinner. Said they want to buy lakefront property. Declined. Dated Christmas before last. My hands trembled as I turned more pages. Robert had been documenting a pattern I'd been too blind to see. The requests for money. The thinly veiled manipulations. The growing distance whenever the answer was no. I closed the album, feeling sick. Had Robert seen who our son was becoming long before I had? Had he tried to shield me from it? The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. For one hopeful moment, I thought it might be Anthony coming to apologize. But when I opened the door, it was my neighbor Martha holding a casserole dish. "Thought you might need this," she said, pressing it into my hands. "Church group has been worried about you. You haven't been to service since." She trailed off. "Thank you," I said, accepting the dish, though I had little appetite these days. Martha hesitated. "Jennifer, I hope you don't mind me saying, but we saw Anthony and his family at the Simpsons barbecue last weekend. They were telling people you've been." She lowered her voice. Confused since Robert passed, making poor decisions. The casserole dish suddenly felt heavy in my hands. "Were they now?" Martha looked uncomfortable. "I just thought you should know. People are talking." After she left, I set the casserole in the refrigerator with the others that well-meaning neighbors had delivered over the past months. So Anthony and Ursula were spreading rumors about my mental state. A classic move to discredit me if I spoke out about what they'd tried to do. I returned to Robert's study, drawn back to that photo album. As I flipped through it again, I noticed a sealed envelope taped to the last page. My name was written on it in Robert's handwriting. With shaking fingers, I peeled it free and broke the seal. Inside was a letter, dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack. "My dearest Jennifer," it began. "If you're reading this, then either I've shown you this album or you found it after I'm gone. There are things I've protected you from, but perhaps I've been wrong to do so." I sank deeper into Robert's chair, feeling his presence around me as I read his final warning about our son. About the borrowed money never repaid. About Ursula's constant probing about our finances. About his decision to make our will and life insurance policy ironclad. "I've arranged things to protect you," his letter concluded. "Trust Grace. She knows what to do if they try anything. You are stronger than you know, my love. You always have been." I held the letter to my chest. Tears, flowing freely for the first time in weeks. Even in death, Robert was still protecting me. But now it was my turn to stand on my own. The isolation hurt. Each day without hearing my grandchildren's voices was a small heartbreak. But as I carefully placed the album and letter back on the shelf, I felt a resolve hardening within me. If Anthony wanted to declare war over money, he would discover what I had just learned from Robert's final message. I was not defenseless, and I was not alone. A month of silence stretched into 2. Summer heat gave way to autumn chill, and still no word from Anthony or my grandchildren. The rumors around town had grown. According to Grace, people at her gym whispered that I was suffering from widow's dementia, unable to manage my own affairs. I found myself drawn to Robert's study more frequently, seeking comfort in the space where his presence still lingered. One rainy afternoon, while searching for our old tax returns, I noticed something peculiar about his desk. The bottom drawer didn't seem to close completely. Kneeling down, I pulled it open and felt along the bottom. My fingers found a small latch. When I pressed it, a hidden compartment revealed itself, containing a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. Robert had never been one for journaling. In 40 years of marriage, I'd never once seen him record his thoughts. Yet here was evidence that my husband had kept secrets, even from me. I settled into his chair, the journal heavy in my hands. The first entry was dated 5 years ago. I've started this record on Attorney Morris's advice. He says I need documentation. I hope to God he's wrong about Anthony and Ursula, but I fear he isn't. My heart pounded as I turned the pages. Robert had documented every financial request from our son and daughter-in-law, every emergency that required funds, every investment opportunity they'd pressured him to join. He'd also recorded their reactions when he occasionally refused. Anthony called me outdated and financially illiterate today when I declined to invest in his friend's restaurant venture. Ursula suggested I was being miserly with their inheritance. When did my son start viewing our retirement savings as his entitlement? Another entry from just 8 months before his death. Ursula asked pointed questions about our life insurance today. Again, said they were just planning for the future. The way she looked at me made my blood run cold. I had to set the journal down, my hands trembling too badly to hold it. I remembered that day, Ursula's casual inquiries over Sunday dinner. I'd thought nothing of it, but Robert had seen it for what it was. He'd seen everything, while I'd been blind. The most recent entry was dated just 2 weeks before his fatal heart attack. Met with Howard at the bank today while Jennifer was at her book club. Changed the policy structure. He seemed concerned about my insistence on the new conditions, but I was firm. If my suspicions are correct, this is the only way to protect her. I'm seeing Attorney Morris tomorrow to finalize the adjustments to the will as well. The next page contained a detailed list of accounts, passwords, and instructions, along with a note. Grace knows about these changes. She'll help Jennifer navigate this when the time comes. A warm tear splashed onto the page. All this time, I'd believed I was acting alone when I transferred the money to Grace, that it had been my impulse decision. Now I understood. Robert had arranged it all. Grace hadn't just been helping me, she'd been fulfilling her promise to my husband. The doorbell rang, pulling me from the journal. I quickly returned it to its hiding place and went to answer, expecting Grace for our weekly dinner. Instead, I found Ursula's mother, Diane, standing on my porch. "Jennifer," she said, her voice lacking the warmth of previous visits. "May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. While never close, Diane and I had maintained a cordial relationship over the years. She settled herself on the edge of the sofa, back straight, hands folded primly in her lap. "I'll be direct," she said. "Anthony and Ursula are struggling. The rumors about their financial situation have reached the country club. They're being quietly dropped from committees." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not completely honestly. "They've told me what you did," she continued, her tone accusing. "Transferring Robert's insurance money away from the family, it's unnatural." "Unnatural," I repeated. "Is that what they called it? You must understand how it looks. A widow turning against her only son?" I thought of Robert's journal, of the meticulous records he'd kept of their manipulations. Did they happen to mention why I did it? Diane shifted uncomfortably. "They said you've been confused since Robert's passing, that you've fallen under the influence of your niece." I laughed, the sound startling both of us. "Is that what they're saying?" "Jennifer, whatever disagreement you've had, surely it can be resolved. They're your family." I studied Diane's face, the genuine concern there. She believed what they'd told her. Of course she did. She was a mother defending her child, just as I had once defended Anthony. "Diane," I said gently, "has Ursula asked you for money recently?" Her slight flinch told me everything. "That's not relevant." "It's entirely relevant. How much have they borrowed from you?" "Everyone goes through rough patches," she said defensively. "Ursula has expensive tastes, yes, but did you know they're more than $400,000 in debt?" I interrupted. Diane paled. That can't be right." "I wish it weren't." I sighed. I suspect that's why they were so eager to get their hands on Robert's life insurance. It was never about helping me manage the money. Diane's carefully composed expression began to crack. Even so, cutting them off completely seems extreme. I didn't cut them off, Diane. They cut me off when I refused to hand over my financial security. She was quiet for a long moment. I had no idea, she finally whispered. As she left, I felt a strange mix of sadness and vindication. The truth was finally emerging, piece by piece. Robert had seen it coming. He'd prepared as best he could, leaving me breadcrumbs to follow once. He was gone. That night, I carefully read through the entire journal, absorbing each entry. By the time I finished, one thing was abundantly clear. I wasn't honoring Robert's memory by transferring the money. I was fulfilling his final wish. 3 months of silence had hardened into a new normal. I'd stopped checking my phone for messages. That never came. Stopped looking hopefully at the door whenever the bell rang. The holidays loomed ahead. My first Thanksgiving and Christmas without Robert, and now without Anthony and the grandchildren too. Grace had invited me to spend Thanksgiving with her family, but I couldn't summon enthusiasm for celebration. Instead, I found myself cleaning out closets, organizing decades of accumulated possessions. Not because the house needed it, but because keeping busy was better than dwelling on the emptiness. I was boxing up old winter coats for donation when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw no one. Probably another well-meaning casserole from the church ladies, I thought, opening the door. I nearly missed him. My 12-year-old grandson Michael huddled against the November chill, a backpack slung over his shoulder. "Michael," I gasped, pulling him inside. "What are you doing here? Does your father know where you are?" He shook his head, eyes downcast. "I took the bus." "The bus?" My heart raced. "That's nearly an hour's ride. Honey, your parents must be worried sick." "They don't know I'm gone," he mumbled. "Dad's at work. Mom's at her spa day." I led him to the kitchen, noticing how he'd grown taller since I'd last seen him. 3 months could change so much in a child his age. "Are you hungry?" I asked, already pulling sandwich fixings from the refrigerator. He nodded, dropping his backpack on the floor. As I assembled a sandwich, I studied him from the corner of my eye. He looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that no 12-year-old CEO should have. "I miss you, Grandma," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. "Why don't you come over anymore?" The peanut butter knife froze in my hand. "Oh, honey, it's complicated." "Is it because of money?" I heard Dad and Mom fighting about money. "And your name kept coming up." I set the plate in front of him, buying time to choose my words carefully. "Your dad and I had a disagreement about some financial matters after Grandpa died." "Is that why Dad says we're not supposed to talk to you?" Michael took a bite of his sandwich, looking up at me with Robert's eyes. "He told Lily and me that you're confused and making bad decisions." The familiar anger flared, but I tamped it down. "What else did your father say?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. "That you chose Cousin Grace over us, that you gave her all of Grandpa's money that was supposed to be for our college." I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing this new manipulation. Anthony was using his own children as emotional pawns. "That's not quite right," I said gently. "The money was Grandpa's life insurance. It was meant to take care of me now that he's gone. So why did you give it to Grace?" "To keep it safe," I said, choosing simplicity over the full, ugly truth. "Sometimes grown-ups make arrangements to protect what's important." Michael seemed to consider this as he ate. "Dad and Mom fight a lot now," he finally said, "about bills and credit cards. Mom cries sometimes when she thinks we're not around." My heart ached for him. "I'm sorry you're going through that, sweetheart. And I heard Dad say we might have to sell the boat and the vacation house. He said it's your fault." I reached across the table to take his hand. "Michael, listen to me. Your parents' financial problems aren't because of me. They started long before Grandpa died." He nodded slowly, seeming older than his years. I figured. Dad keeps getting these envelopes with red stamps on them. He gets really mad when they come. Collection notices, I realized. Things were worse than I'd thought. Grandma. Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. Can I stay here with you? Just for a little while? The question broke my heart. Oh, honey. You know I'd love nothing more. But we need to call your parents. They must be worried. They won't even notice until dinner, he said bitterly. I squeezed his hand. Even so, we need to let them know you're safe. I reached for my phone, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. 3 months of silence were about to end, and not, in a way, any of us had anticipated. Anthony answered on the first ring, his voice tight with controlled panic. Mom? Have you seen Michael? He's missing and… He's here, I said. He's safe. He took the bus. The relief in Anthony's exhale was audible, quickly followed by anger. Put him on the phone. Now. I handed Michael the phone, watching his face fall as his father's voice rose loud enough for me to hear fragments. Grounded for a month. Worried sick. How dare you? When Michael handed the phone back, his eyes were red-rimmed. Dad's coming to get me, he whispered, sounding defeated. Put the phone to my ear. Anthony? I'll be there in 30 minutes, he snapped. Don't think this changes anything. After he hung up, I sat beside Michael on the couch, letting him lean against me the way he used to when he was smaller. We didn't talk much, just flipped through old photo albums, commenting on funny pictures of his dad as a child. All too soon, tires crunched on the gravel driveway. Just so you know, Michael said as he shouldered his backpack. I'm glad I came. I missed you. I hugged him tightly, memorizing the feel of him in my arms. I missed you too. So much. When I opened the door, Anthony stood on the porch, face drawn and eyes haunted. For a moment, I glimpsed the son I'd raised, vulnerable, uncertain. Get in the car, Michael, he said without looking at me. Michael hugged me once more, whispering, I'll come back, before trudging to the car. Anthony turned to follow, but paused. Thank you, he said stiffly, for calling. As they drove away, I realized something had shifted. The silence had been broken, and in my grandson's brave visit, a small window had opened, not to reconciliation, perhaps, but to the possibility that the story wasn't yet finished. The first snow of winter dusted the ground as I waited in the coffee shop, my hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. I'd chosen neutral territory for this meeting, somewhere public but quiet, where neither of us would have the home field advantage. The bell above the door jingled, and Anthony stepped in, stomping snow from his boots. He looked thinner than… I remembered, the confident swagger replaced by a weariness that showed in the slump of his shoulders. He ordered at the counter before joining me, settling into the chair across from mine. Thank you for meeting me, I said. He nodded stiffly. Michael wouldn't stop asking about you. He's been difficult since his little adventure. It's been 6 weeks, I said. I was beginning to think you'd never call. Anthony stared into his coffee. I almost didn't. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, mother and son, now strangers connected by blood and wounded by choices. How are the children? I finally asked. They miss you, he admitted, especially with Christmas coming. I nodded, feeling the ache of separation. And you and Ursula? His jaw tightened. If you're asking whether we're still drowning in debt, the answer is yes. That's not what I asked. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my heart twist. We're managing. The financial advisor you recommended has been helpful. This surprised me. After Michael's visit, I'd sent Anthony the contact information for Robert's financial advisor, not expecting him to actually use it. I'm glad, I said carefully. We had to sell the boat, he continued. The vacation house is next, Ursula's. Not taking it well. I could imagine. Ursula had always defined herself by possessions, by the envy of others. "And how are you taking it?" I asked gently. Anthony looked up, his eyes, so like Robert's, meeting mine directly for the first time. "I've been an idiot, Mom." The simple admission hung in the air between us. "The financial advisor showed us the numbers," he continued. "Even if you had given us Dad's entire insurance policy, it would have been a temporary fix. We were spending way beyond our means." I reached across the table, stopping just short of touching his hand. "It's not too late to turn things around." "That's what Michael said," he replied with a ghost of a smile. "Out of the mouths of babes, right?" I felt a surge of pride for my grandson. "He's a wise boy. He gets that from you and Dad." Anthony hesitated, then added, "I found Dad's journal after you told me where to look." After Michael's visit, I'd sent Anthony a short note with the location of Robert's hidden diary. I'd debated the decision for days, uncertain whether it would heal or deepen the wounds between us. In the end, I decided truth was the only foundation we could possibly rebuild on. "Have you read it all?" I asked. He nodded, looking ashamed. "Every word." I don't know how to reconcile the son he described with the man I thought I was. "We all have blind spots, Anthony, especially when it comes to those we love." He took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology for the lunch ambush, for the threats, for cutting you off from the kids." "Yes," I agreed. "You do." He seemed startled by my directness, then let out a small laugh. "No sugarcoating? I think we're past that, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "I've told the kids the truth, that I was wrong, that you were protecting yourself, not punishing us. Lily wants to know when she can see you." My heart leapt at the prospect of seeing my granddaughter again. "I'd like that, and about the money," he began. I held up a hand. "The insurance money stays with Grace. That's non-negotiable." "I understand," he said, surprising me again. "That's not what I was going to say." I waited, curious. "The financial advisor suggested bankruptcy," he continued. "A fresh start. Ursula's against it, worried about appearances. But I'm starting to think it's our only option." "It would mean changes," I said carefully. "Big ones." "I know. Downsizing, rebuilding credit slowly, years of frugality." He sighed. "Everything Ursula hates." I heard what he wasn't saying, that his marriage, already strained, might not survive such a fundamental shift in lifestyle. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Advice," he said simply. "And maybe a second chance to be your son." The wall I'd built around my heart since our confrontation didn't crumble entirely, but a small door opened. "That depends," I said, "on what kind of son you choose to be moving forward." He nodded, accepting the condition. "I've been thinking about what Dad wrote, about how money changed me, how I started seeing his hard work as my entitlement. I don't want to be that person anymore." "And Ursula?" Anthony's face clouded. "She's not where I am yet. She still blames you for our situation. But she'll either come around or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Here's my offer," I said, straightening in my chair. "I'll help you navigate this situation, with advice, not money. You can bring the children to visit any time. And if you commit to the financial recovery plan, I'll consider setting up education trusts for Michael and Lily. Trusts that only they can access, and only for education." A mix of emotions crossed his face: gratitude, humility, and a flicker of his old resentment quickly suppressed. "That's more than fair," he said finally. "It's what your father would have wanted," I replied. As we said goodbye outside the coffee shop, snowflakes swirling around us, Anthony hesitated, then gave me an awkward hug. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "For everything." "I know," I said, allowing myself to hold him briefly before stepping back. This is a beginning, not an ending. I watched him walk to his car, a modest sedan that had replaced his luxury SUV. He had a long road ahead, and I wasn't naive enough to think our relationship would ever return to what it had been. Some trust, once broken, cannot be fully restored. But as I drove home to prepare for Grace's visit later that evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. Robert's final gift hadn't just been financial security. It had been clarity, the painful but necessary understanding of who my son had become, and the strength to set boundaries even when it broke my heart. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. Instead, it held memories of Robert, the promise of my grandchildren's laughter returning, and most importantly, the knowledge that I had honored my husband's last wish, to stand firmly in my own strength, even when it meant standing alone. You. "We're right, Robert," I whispered to the empty passenger seat beside me. I was stronger than I knew. As snowflakes melted against the windshield, I smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally learned that some things are worth fighting for, and others must be released with grace. And in that balance, I had found my way forward.